I'm glad that we're here today. And I'm happy just to get started. As most of
Yeah.
you probably know, these member showcases are a way for the community to get to know each other. And I would love it if you connected with Danielle on LinkedIn. I'll go ahead. Is it okay, Danielle, if I
Sure.
your URL to your LinkedIn page?
Absolutely.
There we go. Excellent. All right. So that is in there. And so we have at least 10 questions for you. And we're going to be
Awesome.
talking about your background. Now, Danielle, a little different background than most of the guests we have on these TLD casts, just because Danielle has a background really strong with working with nonprofits, right? And you worked on a farm in Australia.
Yeah.
You were in South Africa.
Yeah.
Let's see, you were in Cambodia.
That's
Um,
right.
and some
You've done
really,
your research, that's for sure.
oh, all there on your LinkedIn profile. But just tell us, like, how did you get here? How'd you get
Sure.
to LND?
Yeah. So I kind of tell people I live the life of never, which is why you never should say never. So my family comes from education background, principals, teachers, professors, and I said I would never do that. But I got back in 2009 from working on farms in Australia, and that was the first big kind of recession for my generation, at least. And I was like, I need a job. And my mom was like, well, you have a bachelor's in English and we need an ESL instructor. English is a second language. Why don't you just teach for a little bit? And it was at the community college. And I thought, do I want to be like my parents? Do I want to be like everyone else? But, bills got to be paid. So I started there, ended up staying there for a decade. And then within that decade, I really kind of fell in love with the idea of nonprofits, especially the smaller nonprofits I would encounter that had educational programming. Their curriculum just really, and I'm not throwing shade as the kids say, but they felt like we can do it in house, but they didn't have the tools, they didn't have the resources. And then there's that pressure of being a nonprofit to always have, minimal amount of expenditures on programming and on internal resources. So I realized, this is something that needs attention. But when I started, I would go to South Africa, work with an NGO, worked with Cambodia. It was the same kind of problems over and over again. And so it was the executive director, actually, from the Harpswell Foundation, the NGO in Cambodia, that said, you should do this curriculum work and learning and development for nonprofits. Like, we need someone like that. And I never planned to go out on my own. I never, I was like, it's perfectly fine to but it was 2020 and things looked dicey. And they had just hired me for a contract. And I said, all right, like, let's go all in. So kind of a bit of I always think, oh, how did I get here? But it's always there. And I think anyone can probably relate to that. All your experiences come together and you realize, oh, I've been on my way here the whole time. So
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Just real quick, how did you end up like working in farms in Australia? I'm just
oh,
curious.
okay. So I had been rejected from another program, and this was like the backup. And much to my parents, like horror probably. But it was like I had spent a year, I'd graduated, I spent a year working, and they had this outreach program. They're like, expand your horizons, young and post grad people. And I was like, yeah, I want to go abroad. Um, and I did, but they still had dial-up internet back then, and so it was like really, really hard. But it was an amazing experience. It was one of those like extreme things. But yeah, I was just, I was got turned down from somewhere else, and they said, "Hey, would you still open to come here?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll go."
Wow.
So
What kind
yeah,
of farm?
it was. I worked at 5 different farms. I did cattle ranching, dairy farm. I've worked in a wine vineyard, pulling the grapes, not drinking the wine. I feel like that should be mentioned.
Right.
Working with sheep, which
Mhm,
was oddly enough my favorite, and
mhm.
then working with like a wheat farm and things like that, and
Oh, that's
just
fascinating.
yeah, super random, but
Yeah,
good
totally.
life.
Now, and so then you made the shift, I guess back into education. Now, I know that the bulk, the vast majority of this community is going to be composed of folks that are they're corporate trainers, or they might be in higher ed. Uh, what do you think? I mean, as somebody who works in L&D, like on the nonprofit side of things, what can you say about that part of it that you think is probably different from the others?
Yeah, I think, and it's funny because I have some higher ed, but not in L&D. And
Mhm.
so I think knowing there's a lot of sometimes definitely more funding, especially for the lower, like small to medium nonprofits.
Right.
I have some colleagues that they work for like United Way, and so that's a completely different conversation. And so I think it's the producing the conversation of this is a value, like professional development isn't just a requirement or a good idea. Training isn't just a good idea, but it's like, what's your culture of kind of learning and putting that and integrating that into their budget system, first of all, and also always having to like wait for the board of directors to kind of approve decisions and just, there's silos, but then there's also this like really big ebb and flow. At least that's been my experience with like we all wear many hats, and so how can I make this easier for you? And so you end up wearing many hats for them, so
Mhm,
that they're able to kind of reach their learning goals and at
mhm.
least bring something that's more than just a couple presentations. We're going to call this training.
Wow. Okay, so probably super lean systems,
Yeah.
super lean processes, budget definitely not, something that would be like, say in a corporate environment. But what do you like about it? What is the appeal to you?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I really like, maybe I just like lean systems. I don't know. I made the joke where I was like, education, nonprofit, why not? I really like, first of all, there's this great sense, and I'm not saying corporate and higher ed are not appreciative, but to have someone come in that's not in there every day and be that extra support and bring creative ideas and tell them, hey, these are the trends that's going on.
Mm.
It's like you end up not being like I'm a consultant. You don't end up being like that, oh, well, here's the consultant that we pay. Um, you find out about their families, you find there's just like this intimacy that kind of builds and this deeper appreciation. You like I had another friend, her consultancy, they invited her to the end of year graduation so that they could see the result. So it's just, I don't know, I still love that kind of you're helping, but you can still tune back into the direct impact.
Right.
And it's always linked to community. There's
Mhm.
always something that we feel like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what, it may be a different state, but oh, I can see this happening here too.
Yeah.
So I really like that.
Yeah, I think I generally it seems like if you're working for a nonprofit, that's kind of like, the appeal of it is just knowing that you're having some impact. And less so than like in a corporate environment where you know that you're driving revenue, but you're probably not like getting any of that revenue regardless. But in a nonprofit, at least like sort of your ideals are being somewhat satisfied by helping with building these curriculums. And so speaking of that, like you probably have to be a little more creative and engaging with the things that you build.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your process a little bit and like what that looks like?
Yeah. So a lot of it's kind of, and I was just having this conversation with another consultant. You
Mhm,
know, I like the small to medium because they are lean. And I think that means you get to embrace more creativity
mhm,
um, and just kind of revamp what you have. So a lot of them, like during the pandemic, were can we use Google Classroom? And I'm like,
yeah,
okay, let's learn about that. What's free to low budget resources? And so using a lot of things um, that's going to work for them, like PowerPoint. Some of them, I'm like, look, it's very robust. This is what we can do. And things that they never considered before, LMSs and things like that. Um, but my process, I mean, I don't know if this you want to get in the weeds, but like having the pre-work form, and the biggest component is, and this is I think for all L&D, making sure all the stakeholders are in place at the beginning.
Mm.
Because even if we are using the low budget or kind of, more economical tools, if the right voices aren't there, then it's not going to matter. And so it's really fun being able to engage, say, okay, like let's talk to the volunteers who have a very different perspective than the program coordinator, who has a different perspective than the board, than the founder. And so just getting all of those voices through, and then having like my pre-form sheet, and then showing everyone this is where we are. We're either on the same page or we're all vastly different.
Mhm.
And so then, kind of guiding through like, all right, what's really going to impact your learners, which, can be, if you're talking to your homeless population and getting more skills, voter registration, working with a group doing that. And so all kinds of things. But yeah, I don't know if that kind of like
No, that covers.
nailed the question, but I could go all over
I'm
that.
sure. I'm sure. But is that your biggest challenge? Is that is getting stakeholder sort of
Yeah.
all of them organized and getting buy-in, even more
Yeah,
so than budget?
definitely. I would say yes, because once we have the conversation of value,
Mhm.
they're like, okay, like we're gonna do this. Where it's really, I get so moved by it, because once that click happens, like, yes, we need a learning culture, we need a strong curriculum, we need that standard process, and then it's the speed of it. I mean, like, I don't know. I'm sure you've encountered this. Everyone's like, I would like this done in 6 weeks, and you're like, yeah, all of us would love that done in 6 weeks, and the reality is, like, double, maybe triple that timeline,
Right.
um, and so it's convincing, like, all the stakeholders, we need to pause, and is everyone represented? Is everyone here?
Mm.
Um, yeah, so that's, I mean, I don't know if I can give an example, but one time I had a founder who, it was for the curriculum in Cambodia, and he's like, there's this emphasis on skin color, so these are young female students, participants in their program. And he's like, I would love it if we had, like Michelle Obama on like PowerPoint slides. And I'm thinking, that's great, except it's not relatable to a 17-year-old Khmer female, first generation student. And so the program coordinator, who is Kamai, she was like, I can't say anything. This is the founder, and he's American, he's male. So there were all these like dynamics that come into play,
Wow.
culture, hierarchy and everything. And so she would send me a message, and then I'd like, all right, I will be your messenger. And it's okay, like if he wants to argue with me, we're of the same culture. I, don't feel, not that I would be disrespectful, but to her it felt very disrespectful to have a difference of opinion.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah, navigating that is definitely, I think, the biggest challenge.
So you must be pretty good at it by now?
I don't know. I still sweat a lot during meetings,
Yeah.
not gonna
Yeah.
lie that.
Y
But I think I've learned the biggest lesson is the pause. Like once
Okay.
people hear like that silence, they're like, oh, maybe this wasn't a good idea,
Mhm.
and I think that's, probably just meeting culture, especially in the US, where we're like, go, 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 comment this. Yes, that's right, good, especially at virtual. But if you're the one that slows the pace and you're like, well, let's think about this. And then
Mhm.
there's that pause. I've learned that kind of shifts people's, openness to, oh, okay, I might rethink that then.
No, that's important, and I think that probably is worthwhile in, in corporate and higher ed environments too, just being able to step back and take that pause. Is there any other tools that you use, like if your curriculum development process might be a little overwhelming, or
Mhm.
feeling like it's getting out of hand? Is there anything else that you might be able to, any other tips you might be able to offer along that line?
Yeah, I think, well, sometimes, especially when we get through a review cycle, which I feel
Mhm.
like a lot of people can relate to, and all the voices come in, having like a preset, or a kind of pre-selected group of questions, say, this
Mm.
is what I want to focus on. And depending on the type of stakeholder, I mean, this might sound scandalous, But like if I know the founder really doesn't have decision-making power, it's like a courtesy that, a kind courtesy,
Mhm.
but he's not going to be delivering. He's not the decision maker. It's just a polite, like, hey, take a look at this. I mean, he gets three questions, is the content make sense? Are there spelling grammar errors? I mean, things where it's not, we're going to be digging up the weeds versus like if it's somebody who's in country or who's delivering the program, then they get, like I have a set of 5 to 6 questions where it's a bit more about, okay, content focused. Where are the mistakes? Where are the gaps? So I've learned to kind of take my stakeholders and get a specific group of questions when it comes to those review cycles. So it just focuses them better and they feel like they're contributing in a really constructive way. And they
Mhm.
are because we're guiding them that way.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I love these situations that are kind of that where you have to you learn the solutions within because there might be cultural differences, right?
Right.
So any chance you might have an example of that, of something, another like sort of culture story that where you learned something really, really important in a given situation because the culture was different?
Yes. Oh my gosh. So this was probably one of my first kind of steps into NGOs, just because I spent so much time working with international students in the United States. I started to realize there's this huge breakdown with, especially the United States or even, like Europe. I'm not throwing them under the bus, but, this idea of we go abroad and we give aid and we don't know the context, we don't know the history, we the day to day. And so I'd gone to Costa Rica. I was working with an NGO, and they were like, we need someone with a background in teaching, and it's connected to tourism. And so it was basic, like, okay, just teach them the skills to communicate on the job. All right. Except the historical context was that these weren't Costa Ricans. Their parents had fled the civil war in Nicaragua and had came to Costa Rica. And so all the examples were about being Costa Rican, all the cultural insight. And finally, at the point of they just weren't relating to it. And there was this belief in the NGO that, well, we're all in Costa Rica, like tourists are going to see Costa Ricans. And so finally, one of, the students raised their hand. She's, we're Nicaraguan, and that distinction and knowing like, okay, you think it's not a big deal, but it is. It's such a big deal to acknowledge someone's roots and
Mhm,
history.
mhm.
And so, I mean, I was like, we have to redo this. We have to, I mean, and no one loves to hear those words. I mean, that's probably why L&D is sometimes not the most popular department at times. But if it's not working, if it's not, if it's breaking down motivation, if it's, and it. So people had stopped coming to these trainings and all of these things. So, I mean, that was, I think, the first big moment and that was, oh my gosh, 2014.
Mhm.
And I still think of it like, okay, who, if you think you have this figured out, this group or this history, this story, what are you really missing? Like, where are the Nicaraguans is what I tell myself,
Mhm.
because it could be right in front of you and you're just blasting away and, missing their kind of their heartbeat, their beginning.
Fascinating. So I guess I'm sort of going back a little bit, but was your experience in Australia your first time abroad?
So actually, my dad was in the military, and my first time abroad was in Okinawa, Japan. So I
Mm,
was about 9 years old, and we were there for about 3.5 years. And
mm.
so that's probably where some seeds got planted
Yeah.
about being around a different culture. We celebrated American holidays and Japanese holidays.
Mhm,
And then it was required in school to go to Japanese culture and Japanese language class
mhm.
twice a week. I can only count to 10, so don't test me on anything. My knowledge has dissipated since then. But yeah, I mean, just that was probably the first major kind of moment of, oh, like there's something different than me, but not different
Right.
bad, like just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm asking because I'm wondering about where your your comfort level with this, because I mean, as like an L&D professional, a curriculum developer for say, a Cambodian audience, a Costa Rican audience, how much do you need to know their language, or how much do you get into that?
Right. Oh, it's a great question.
Mhm.
So I started this, I think it's habits from when I taught ESL. Um, I would deep dive into my students' cultures because there were so many, there's all these, culture is so innate and we do so many things without thinking. And so, like, for example, when I first started teaching in 2009, um, we had two main populations, Vietnamese and Mexican, and I'm in North Texas. And then by the time at 10 years, I mean, you would have like 5 to 6 cultures. But then you would have, even if you had Spanish speakers, you'd have the different dialects, you'd have the different pronunciations. There was like a Peruvian student who got in an argument with a Mexican student because their word for saying, this fruit was offensive to this. So I started to learn, okay, you need to do your research to serve them in the best possible way because everyone came with a goal, and that's to learn a language, be able to be proficient enough in reading, writing, and speaking so that they can get a better job, so they can communicate, in everyday life. So those habits kind of came from there. And I think just you have to be curious. And that has always served me very well. Not nosy, but curious. There is a difference. But yeah, and so when I get a client, even if it's a client that's based in the US and they serve, their learners and they serve here in the US, I'm like, well, what's that region like? Well, what's the demographics like? Why is this a problem? And, you go from there.
Mhm, mhm. So, do you run into many other like L&D professionals in
Mm.
this space? Like, having your background in working with NGOs and nonprofits, are there a lot of you out there?
That's so funny that you phrase it like that because we call ourselves the unicorn.
Right.
We're getting more well known. I can't
Yeah.
believe that my first year as a consultant, I found one person
Uh-huh.
and we were like, oh my gosh. And then over time, you do start to meet more. And I'd say I know maybe 10, which sounds like really small, I'm sure. But to us, we're like, whoa,
We
we're
gotta
almost a team.
let's find more of you so you guys can help each other. We got to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how about that? Like how do you stay on top of your professional development in this world of nonprofits and L&D? Like what do you is there I mean, you probably I'm sure just take from everybody else, of course, but is there anything like, or maybe you're building something that has never existed before, like a knowledge base, and actually I want to mention that before the end about your end of summer L&D bundle, but um like, is there anything that you do in particular to stay on top of your professional development?
Yeah, I've learned I have to like patchwork quilt it.
Mm,
I do, with L&D, it's of course this community has been amazing.
mm,
And then joining my ATD chapter here, staying a lot of, like iSpring has their conferences, um, staying in touch with L&D, and then always like, how can this apply to nonprofit? How can this apply, especially to a smaller or medium nonprofit? And then I've got my set of nonprofit associations. What are their biggest challenges?
mm,
And you learn the tips and tricks, like what events are they having? What are like there's like the smart bulletins that seems to be the theme for some reason for nonprofits. They give you a rundown on all the biggest problem areas, and you're always going to find training is needed.
mm, mhm,
So just trying to like crisscross things, but at times it does feel like, okay, you've got to maybe not reinvent the wheel, but adjust the wheel because the car and the tire may not be compatible.
mhm.
Um, so yeah.
Nice. How about, so you had mentioned iSpring. Um,
Yeah.
do you is that because they're friendly to nonprofits, or why do you use their tools?
Well, so They have a free option. Let's put the cards on the table. And so that way, if you have a free, like Talent LMS, if you have a free or low budget option,
Mhm.
nonprofits are going to know about you.
Right, right.
And so, but they have a lot of free, like their conference is free and things like that. And so, always trying to think what's economical, remove the barriers, to accessing information and accessing tools, and things like that.
Okay, okay, I get it. Yeah, yeah. Because they've been around for a
Oh,
while,
okay.
and I know a lot of people do love their tools, and so I was just curious. Any other vendors out there that you work with or are particularly fond of that help, sort of a nonprofit person in L&D?
Yeah, I think Talent LMS is
Okay,
really good.
yeah.
They do have, and then you can pay per user, which is nice. But one of the things I really love about them is that they have a very extensive multilingual. This sounds like hashtag ad, but this is why when a client comes to me, they have a multilingual, like I can't even remember if it's definitely over 20. Um, but they also offer trainings in completely and with native speakers who speak Spanish and just which is so important for certain areas in the United States, and training even in Central and South America. So I love that. Anything that's like, let's put the cards on the table, let's make this accessible, to multiple audiences. I keep a tab. So if anyone knows any other ones, definitely let me
Yeah,
know.
Cindy had actually mentioned Cornerstone has great free
Yes.
resources for
Awesome.
nonprofits, so that's good to know. Excellent. All right. Well, gosh, this is great. Yeah, Kim had mentioned I could literally listen to Danielle's stories all day long.
Uh,
Such great
just
insight.
wait till you hear about the cows. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, so we got a couple more here, just real quick. If you weren't an L&D professional, what do you think you'd be?
Oh my gosh. I'm sure it would still come down to like teaching in some way.
Mhm.
Probably I'm a runner, not a fast one, but I'm a runner. So maybe something like a coach or,
Oh,
to that.
nice.
Yeah.
Really? Wow, that's great. Would you still want to involve travel in it? It seems like that's something that you do.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think so. There's this Instagram. I follow a bunch of coaches and they'll go on like international races. I'm like, one day, Coach Alicia, I will be with you.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. That is, and that's a great thing for Instagram. Like if you have a specific interest and you want to be inspired by people, like that's a great place to do it. I mean, social media is tough for me ordinarily, but I do like following certain, musicians and things like that that keep me inspired.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So if there's one thing that people should know about you, Danielle, what is it?
Ooh.
Ooh.
Oh my gosh. Should have prepared for this one. um, let's see. Well, you might have written this one, but I ran a 50K race,
Mm,
31 miles,
mm.
but not because I wanted to. My friend signed, or he said he was going to sign up, so I did and paid. This is a cautionary tale, everyone. And he never signed up. And
Oh,
so there I was on the start day, and I was like,
boy.
John, where are you at? And he's like, oh, I just never registered. Yeah,
Oops.
yeah. So I'm very loyal. That's what we're going to learn about this. I'm a very good friend, but apparently I need to read the fine print in the first
Right.
place.
There's Bobby
That's
asking.
what you need to know about me. Blind
Yeah.
loyalty.
Yeah. Bobby was asking, are you still friends?
We'll see at the end of this year. If he decides to run one, then I'll forgive him.
Aw- Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your consultancy's end of summer bundle. What is that about?
Yeah. So part of what we were talking about earlier is getting resources and just eliminating, barriers to access for small to medium nonprofits. I was talking with another consultant and I said, wouldn't it be nice if there was just like one place to go to? And we just took the best of everything we had, whether it was a template or a checklist or a how to video when it came to learning and development. And it could be, for DEI, AB, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging. So that it doesn't feel like, how can I get this? Where can I get this? Who can I trust? Right? Those are always the big questions. So we, I've reached out to a bunch of different consultants and said, do you serve nonprofits? Are you interested in serving nonprofits in this way? And so I had quite a few consultants raise their hand and say, yeah, I'll share my freebies. So the
Wow.
first 2 weeks in August, we're going to consolidate. And interesting enough, which has been really humbling, a lot of people who are not in nonprofits have said, yeah, I'm interested in learning more about this. So I
Mhm.
love that, because learning should be for everyone. We should get excited. I think learning should be fun and definitely accessible. So the first 2 weeks of August, yeah, we're going to open up, and anyone and everyone, even if you're not a nonprofit, if it's something that you need, they can take it, use it, adapt it, and hopefully it brings them some really deep kind of root system training for whatever, kind of community they serve.
That's awesome. Um, yeah, keep me posted on that. I mean, I would love
Oh,
to be able to, formalize something and just share it with the community, because it sounds like it's an admirable effort, something that
thank
people
you.
would benefit from. So definitely like send it all over, and I would be happy to help with helping get eyes on it. Yeah,
Oh,
thanks.
thank you.
Yeah, no,
Awesome.
absolutely. Yeah, you know what? There was an NGO, because I used to, when I was doing conferences with the Guild way back when, there was one
Hmm.
I regularly worked with and even devoted part of the conference to their efforts. And I'm wondering, I'm going to try to look them up and see, and maybe I can, if they're still around, I can connect you. But they were really
Yeah.
focused on trying to get training out, um, you know, to uh, to places in Africa, just all over the world, actually. And so maybe I could get that information and get it to you. But Danielle, so
That'd
great
be
to talk
great.
to you. If you have like, any needs or anything for any of the nonprofits that you're working for, please hit up TLDC, because that's kind of like what we're all about is
Awesome. Definitely.
and I'm so glad that you were able to share some time for us. Oh, there you go, Bobby. The e-learning for kids was one of them. Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
e-learning
Great.
for kids. And there was another one. Bobby, I'm sure maybe you were around back then, but I know that when we did our Orlando conferences, we would always have a piece of that event was devoted to them. We'd have a party and stuff, and just try to get some exposure to them and their efforts. And we used to find a lot of instructional designers that would create content and for this particular nonprofit group. So but e-learning for kids was definitely one of the other ones. So that's good to know. Yes, thank
That's
you. All right.
awesome.
So yeah, Danielle, thank you so much.
Thank you. This
Yeah,
was a pleasure. Thank you.
yeah, it'll be great to connect again. And let's see, everybody, I did get a message from Leanne Morgan about tomorrow. She is not going to be available because she has bronchitis right now. So
Oh, no.
tomorrow there's
Poor
no
thing.
there's no showcase, but we'll be continuing again with next week. And then also, I haven't connected with Mallory yet about recordings and things like that for the Black and L&D event, or the Learning Exchange event that took place last week. I'm sure there are a ton of recordings that they have to go through. So I'm not sure when that content is going to be out, but I don't know if Danielle, if you were there, if you sat in with any of the sessions, but that was quite the event last week with 70
Yeah.
speakers, 50 something sessions, I think, or something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, that must have been something. But I'll hopefully have more information about that soon. And other than that, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. And thanks everyone. Thanks, Mom.
Yes.
All
I
right,
know.
Danielle,
Nice to meet you all.
we'll talk again. Okay.
Bye.
All right. Bye.